Hello, and welcome to another Cyber Threat Alliance webinar. My name is Neil Jenkins, and I'm the Chief Analytic Officer at CTA. We're a nonprofit organization that brings cybersecurity providers together to share information on the latest cyber threats and collaborate. So joining me today from CTA member Sophos is Andrew Brandt. Andrew's a principal researcher at Sophos, and he's a member of CTA's Algorithm and Intelligence Committee. And most importantly for today's discussion, he was the editor of Sophos's 2022 threat report. Andrew's going to walk us through the threat report today, and we'll discuss some of the trends that shaped the threat landscape in 2021 to gain insights into what's coming for us in 2022. Just for your awareness, the report is available from Sophos's website at sophos.com, and you can also find links to it on their blog site at news.sophos.com. So before we start, just a bit of logistics. Viewers can ask questions in the Q&A window of the webinar. We'll do our best to get to them in the discussion, but if we don't have time, we'll try and address them via email afterwards. So let's get right to it. Andrew, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself in a little more detail and kick things off with an introduction to the report.
Thank you, Neil. I don't know how to introduce myself better than you've already done, but yes, that's. I was the editor of the Sophos 2022 threat report. I work as a principal researcher for Sophos Labs. I do malware analysis and network forensics, and in my spare time, I find opportunities to write bits and pieces of our report throughout the year in the form of blog posts about current threats. So I write for a blog called Sophos Labs Uncut, and I am a member of the CTA and our representative, Sophos's representative to the organization. So I will share my screen if we're all ready to go. And can everyone see the presentation?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Well, so I just wanted to introduce the report. The theme of this year's report was interrelated threats targeted an interdependent world, and it's relevant because everything seems to be connected, and with an internet that is on fire this week, it seems especially relevant to be talking about this stuff. The threat report was it's our summary, our look back at the previous year's important developments in the threat landscape. It's also a look forward at how those events that took place during 2021 will affect key industries, roles within organizations in 2022. The report was I was the editor of the report, but it was actually written by a team of people who include the managed threat response team and rapid response teams at Sophos, who are our threat hunters and the paratroopers who drop into incident response. We also involved the Sophos AI team, which is a data science group involved in building an AI for the next generation of doing threat intelligence analysis and threat detection. And of course, the malware researchers, reverse engineers, and other folks within Sophos Labs who do the heavy lifting from week to week. So let's talk first about the threat trends that we anticipate for the coming year. So I'm not going to read the whole slide, and I should say that I should give a caveat that I don't have a crystal ball, and that things may change, but we do believe that these are robust, evidence-based anticipations based on our research and analysis that we do on a weekly basis. We do know that, for example, ransomware is already becoming more modular, and that the attackers who are involved in using ransomware for attacks have standardized on certain patterns of behavior. That's what we mean by that they're more modular and uniform, is that they're basically using different tools to accomplish different tasks, but they are using the same different tools for those tasks, for example. We are also seeing a lot more attacks against non-traditional targets for malware. So typically people see platforms like Apple's iOS or Linux as a more secure, more stable platform for for enterprise. And we're seeing that the attackers realize this. And as their market share has been sort of slowly on the increase, so has been the number of attacks. So, apologize. Was pretty sure that I was muted. In fact, I am muted. I don't know why. I started beeping. Let's talk about ransomware. Okay, so one of the things that Sophos spends a significant portion of its time doing is fighting ransomware, not just because it seems to be the #1 threat out there, but also, as I mentioned, we have these teams of people that get dropped in like flame jumpers into a forest fire. That we call them the rapid response team, and they get called in for emergency situations. So when we have customers that are in the middle of an incident, or they've just had a ransomware attack take place, this is the group that shows up and takes the heavy lifting of hand-to-hand combat with the attackers in some cases while they're in the network. The team has been around for about 18 months, and in that past 18 months, this is the breakdown of the sort of like core reason why we were engaged with these customers. As you can see, the vast majority of the incidents involve ransomware, but we also are dealing with, in some cases, the companies have resolved their ransomware incident, but they're still trying to find out how data got exfiltrated. Sometimes there are enterprise servers that are internet facing that have had web shells installed on them. And these are the kinds of things that we are called in to deal with. And what it really shows is that the ransomware sort of, the weight of ransomware on the threat landscape is still humongous. It's still a giant part of our day-to-day activities. And the adversaries have been shifting towards larger organizations, and they've been, of course, shifting to larger ransom demands as a result. There's also been this big move between it's sort of standalone threat groups that basically create their own ransomware and engage in the attacks, to this model that is now called RAS, or Ransomware-as-a-Service. And that this pay-to-play service model is seemingly the way that most ransomware seems to be trending. One of the things that we are, of course, observing as we're looking at these attacks, and we're doing, in some cases, after action reports on what took place, is that the various components of the attack are as a service, not just the ransomware, but sometimes the initial access that the attackers use is purchased through third parties who specialize in developing initial access to an organization or company, and that all of these services sort of are interrelated in this criminal landscape. We also anticipate that there are probably going to be more playbooks for ransomware threat actors discovered. We had a couple of them that leaked in the previous year, and these playbooks indicate that the typical attacker, while they may be good at doing the breaking in, they're not necessarily experts in lateral movement or how to manipulate domain controllers in order to move around within a network and spread the ransomware. And so these companies that are providing the ransomware as a service to their customers, who are other criminals, they also provide them with these detailed playbooks on how to use all these tools to break in, move around, spread the ransomware as widely as possible, and in theory, get the largest possible ransom outcome.
Yeah, and Andrew, I think one of the things I wanted to point out there was how good your report does a very good job of kind of breaking out this ecosystem of this specialization that these criminals are doing now, right? And it makes things much more consequential for organizations, because the criminals can really focus on what they're good at, right? Like the ransomware operator or the ransomware creators can focus on making really good ransomware, and the initial access brokers can specialize on getting those credentials and getting into the systems, and everybody can kind of get better at what they're doing, which makes things a little more difficult for the organizations, right? So I thought that was a really good way to bring that out. It also confuses things from an attribution perspective because everybody kind of looks the same, or there's different gradations within the pathway of who's doing what to make attribution a little more confusing.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point, and something I was going to mention later on in the presentation too, but it's fine to bring it up now, which is that, yeah, we used to use these playbooks as ways of identifying what threat group was behind particular ransomware attacks, and it does confuse attribution significantly when everybody's basically following the same rules. So yeah, so you can read the slide here, and you know, I'm not going to read off the numbers to you, but you know, sort of the key takeaway here from this chart. These are the incidents in which the rapid response team was called in on a ransomware attack. These were the ransomware families most frequently seen by the rapid response team. And as you can see, you know, Conti, Revil, Ryuk, Ragnarok, Lockbit, Darkside, they're all, or, you know, at least they were in the case of the recently disbanded Revil and Darkside, they were all ransomware-as-a-service operations, right? And that these RAS operations account for nearly 60% of the incidents that we are dealing with when we deal with these incident response cases. Again, just sort of highlighting the fact that RAS seems to be the direction that the criminals are going. And yeah, when we talk about playbooks and the tools that the attackers are using, this is, you know, one example of a playbook that was leaked. So earlier in 2021, we discovered that on a criminal message board where these services are advertised and where people come to sort of like solicit their services as break-in experts. One of these affiliates of the Conti ransomware decided that they were really unhappy with, for whatever reason, with the way that the Conti ransomware team was treating them. And in a fit of pique, they decided to leak the entire playbook that Conti was giving out to its customers being other criminals. And this playbook was incredibly detailed. So it highlighted, you know, some of these commercial tools like Mimikatz and also how to conduct, you know, different types of PowerShell commands to do, you know, running the malware, or how to use WMI to laterally copy files across the network or execute things filelessly on machines that are controlled by a domain controller. And incredibly useful stuff for defenders, except it's terrible because once everybody who's using Conti is for following the same game plan, it's difficult to see how you make a distinction between, you know, affiliate A and affiliate B, because they're all doing the same thing, even though they're different groups in different parts of the world with different targets and different interests. And yeah, this normalization sort of like becomes a problem at identifying who's doing what. And yeah, it just seems to be that the trend is that this this tendency towards as a service model for ransomware is this like black hole. It seems to be drawing more and more of the affiliates to engage in this practice. It's also means that the teams that are building the ransomware are being drawn to the RAS groups to sort of work on their ransomware and their techniques. And it just means that, yeah, we're seeing a lot more sort of commodity loaders and droppers focused on delivering ransomware. So all of this it sort of loops into this black hole of, you know, criminality. And, you know, so the other thing that we're seeing that's a trend and that's important to talk about is that the ransomware attackers, you know, at first ransomware was just, we've encrypted your data, if you want it back, you know, pay us the money. Then people figured out that, oh, if we have really good backups, we don't need to do that. The criminals then started doing the trick with exfiltrating the data and holding it hostage for extortion. If you don't pay us the ransom, you'll never get your data back, and we'll leak it to the public. You know, now the latest trend seems to be that in some cases, attackers are calling the victims on the telephone. And we actually have voicemail recordings where the extortionist basically left a message saying, you know, boy, wouldn't it be a shame if all your company's private data were leaked? You know, really, you should be working with us. They've also been targeting the company. There are specialized companies in the security field who work with negotiating on behalf of victims with the criminals. And some of the criminal groups have decided that no, we're not going to work with professional negotiators anymore. We're done with this. Like, either you negotiate with us yourself or we don't work with you. And yeah, the threats are getting more intense and they're coming from many more directions. So again, backups alone are not really good enough to sort of stop this ransomware behavior. You're going to have to do a better job of protecting your stuff from getting hit in the first place.
And I think too that shows kind of like how organizations have progressed in their defense and their tactics and techniques to defend against ransomware actors, right? Like, one of the best things that you could do prior to these extortion attempts was ensure that you have backups. And ransomware actors kind of saw organizations doing that and kind of took the next step. And so now kind of, you know, what do you see as some of the next things that organizations can do to kind of help get around this extortion piece? I'm hoping that organizations start looking for more opportunities to detect data exfil before the ransomware attempt, for example, right? What are some other things that organizations can do to kind of continue taking these next steps against these attackers?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And so one of the things, and you mentioned one of the main things, which is that the attackers are using commercial tools in order to exfiltrate the data to various cloud storage providers. Something that a defender could very easily do, if they have the appropriate monitoring tools, is to just watch for large data file transfers from unexpected sources or at unexpected times. You know, huge amounts of data leaving the network on a Sunday at 2 a.m. is probably not a normal, you know, company backup time, for example. It might be, but like, if it's not, you know, that's a very easy indicator, right? The other thing that's useful to do is to be able to watch for the tools that are, so for example, threat actors are using the cloud storage provider mega.nz as a place as a destination for this exfiltrated stolen data. And they're using the regular Mega client in some cases to do that uploading into the cloud storage service. Mega, you know, having a tool of their own that basically it is benign, is not a malicious tool. They are not a, you know, service for criminals. They are used for, you know, regular folks to do their backups. But if you have the ability to allow list certain tools, like, it would definitely make sense to put this on the questionable tool list unless you have a specific need, and in which case you then only give the person who's responsible for backups access to be able to run, you know, the Mega uploader from a single machine or from specific machines only at specific times. You know, these are sort of common sense things you can do to kind of lock down networks. And of course, like, it all comes down to initial access, right? And these brokers whose jobs are to poke away at your network and look for, you know, the vulnerable VPN, or the, you know, there's maybe a port that's open sharing remote desktop from an internal machine. It's common sense, basic security hygiene stuff that you need to take care of to lock down those open ports and make sure that you have a good password policy for remote desktop and use multi-factor authentication. All this stuff, fundamentals are going to save your bacon time and again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's talk a little bit about how tools and targets have changed and also where they're going next year. So in sort of like the past year, we've seen the use of a tool called Cobalt Strike, which is a tool used by penetration testers and security red teamers to sort of profile and evaluate the security of networks and their defenders. And there was a leak of Cobalt Strike source code that happened recently, and the end result of that leak is that every criminal group everywhere is using Cobalt Strike beacons, which are essentially small, very difficult to detect remote access Trojans and like full, rats that serve as a backdoor into a network. They're using these sort of pen tester tools to break in and also to give access to others as well. So probably what's amazing is how often we see Cobalt Strike and how frequently we see it as a root cause of a ransomware attack, that there was a Cobalt Strike beacon that was dropped by some piece of malware, and all of a sudden, moments later, there's ransomware involved. So keeping an eye on these tools is definitely like job number one for 2022. It's already been job number one in 2020. Like this is how we've charted detection of Cobalt Strike. So this is no negativity towards the makers of Cobalt Strike. They themselves were a victim of crime, but what has happened is that the criminals have just rapidly adopted this tool, and it's basically turned into one of the top tools that we see, not only used by ransomware, but it just being dropped directly by conventional malware like TrickBot or Iced ID or Bazaar Loader, and often these factor into some of the most of the rapid response incidents involving ransomware. We track more than 180 different tools that can be used for dual purpose, right? So there are enormous numbers of utilities that have been created by security researchers or red teamers, red team groups that basically are used to profile and to determine the level of security within an organization, but they can be turned to evil. So tools like Mimikatz, which are used to sniff and break the Windows passwords in the password managers. Incredibly high volume of use of Mimikatz. It's almost every ransomware incident. The attackers, once they get onto a network, they're deploying Mimikatz because they want to look for those domain admin passwords, and so we're seeing them in huge percentages of incidents involving ransomware, but we also see it all the time in other kinds of break-ins. The Metasploit framework in Cobalt Strike also very high usage in different types of engagements. So not just ransomware, but also in break-ins where just data theft is the goal and data is being exfiltrated. They're using these tools as a way of laterally moving and deploying additional code on machines. So we are going to keep watching these, and we are also going to be tracking newer tools like this utility called Sharp Sweep that we saw sort of emerge sort of late in 2020 and has grown in popularity through sort of like the end of this year and may continue to grow. We're seeing it almost as frequently as Cobalt Strike. So we are seeing another thing that we've observed and that we're going to continue watching are these hybrid attacks. And what we mean by hybrid attack is that that they're attacks that involve different sort of vectors. And the one example that we use is this malware campaign that we have called Bootloader. Bootloader was a campaign that we did some research on in the past year that it's typical attack, is going to either be a direct attack against the network or some sort of like subtle thing through email where they send you a link or they send you a file and you're going to be attacked in a sort of a conventional way through an attachment or being told to download a link. Bootloader is interesting in that it was using search engine poisoning to lead people into an attack scenario in which they were convinced that they were getting a download of something that they actually were looking for in a Google search. And they're using search engine poisoning to basically break in to not literally break into Google, but to sort of crack through like certain types of search terms on Google and direct people into these web pages where they will willingly download and run a weaponized file. So this is what we mean by hybrid attack, is that you don't even realize you're under attack when you are being directed into something that looks like a message board where someone is asking a very similar question to the one that you just asked Google, and someone else on that message board says, "Oh, I've got just the thing for you. Here's a download link for it." You're not even necessarily aware that you're looped in on an attack method here, and it was targeting people in using English, but also French and Korean and German, and this kind of hybrid method of tricking people into getting it, to installing the malware themselves. We anticipate is going to sort of continue going forward. It was extremely successful as far as we can tell. And we did talk a little bit about Linux-based systems. So we have a whole team called Lalo that deals with Linux-based malware, Linux-based threats. They have been extremely busy. Just in the past year, we've encountered a number of ransomware groups that have decided that they're going to target Linux servers as well as Windows devices for ransom. So there's a lot of there's tools for data exfiltration, there's tools for ransomware, there's even Python scripts that have been used to ransom entire hypervisors. So VMware's ESXi is another sort of key example here. This is a lot of companies have decided that, especially in a sort of hybrid world where some employees are remote, many employees are remote, some employees are on-prem. It makes sense to virtualize certain services and tools, and they believe that the fact that it's on a virtual machine means that if something happens to that virtual machine, they can just revert back to a snapshot. Well, if you get the hypervisor and you encrypt the whole thing, like there goes your entire rack of servers that are in VMs, and yeah, the criminals are recognize that this was a weak point for them, so they've decided to target that. And we're also seeing Linux malware that's targeting IoT devices, right? It's not just expected to be a target of attack. I think now that we're well into a week of Log4j or Log4j, however you want to pronounce it, attacks that IoT devices as well that use that logging mechanism it's going to be very difficult to sort of break them out of that vulnerable state, because many of those devices don't get very frequent updates. And we still see, the use of IT administration tools. These are the completely legitimate tools that are used by IT organizations within large companies, or they're they are used sometimes by small who don't have their own IT staff, these are going to continue to be a target for attack, right? That hitting SolarWinds Orion, which was extremely bad, followed by Kaseya. Now we're looking at Log4j and other sort of components of software all being used in these attacks. We're still seeing, even though Microsoft released the patches for various Exchange vulnerabilities earlier this year, we're still seeing high numbers of people attempting to use proxy logon and proxy shell to put remote access tools onto Exchange servers, and in some cases succeeding and delivering ransomware, crypto miners, other sorts of remote access tools. The Cobalt Strike is another deliverable that proxy shell is used to put onto enterprise machines. And all of this is looking like it's going to continue well into 2022.
Yeah, and as you mentioned too, like with Log4j this week, I mean, we're already seeing that pattern exhibit itself again, which kind of fits into a couple of your trends, like the hybrid attack, where you're seeing mass exploitation, and then potentially like a more targeted exploitation or further exfiltration of data, or potentially ransomware down the line. We're seeing scanning for a vulnerability, loading crypto miners, in a couple of weeks. Who knows what it will look like, but I think you're dead on with this trend.
Yeah, and not much credence is given to crypto miners, and we see huge numbers of automated botnets like Mirai that are delivering crypto miners, and Lemon Duck, and not much sort of import is given to them. And the way that I see it is, if an attacker can just with a script get a crypto miner on there, there's nothing to stop them. And just because they delivered a crypto miner doesn't mean that the next deliverable couldn't be a Cobalt Strike beacon or a Metasploit module, or some other rat, or just a ransomware binary. So yeah, treating crypto miners with the seriousness that they clearly deserve is probably an important skill to do. Like, if you not taking anything for granted in your alerting system is probably the highest piece of advice here.
Great point.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about some threats to mobile stuff. So we know that we're all carrying around these little supercomputers in our pockets, and you've got the internet in my pants, but that just means that more and more of our lives are sort of controlled by these devices, and where the life and the utility and the money is where the criminals are going to go. And so we are continuing to see a rise in not just the volume of mobile malware, but also the sort of variety of mobile malware, and the methods in which these malware are being distributed. Companies that specifically use vulnerabilities in phone devices aside, we're still seeing a number of different threat actor groups that are using SMS to deliver malware. That the malware typically has the ability to do things like read all of your mobile messaging, whether it's email or SMS. They're able to hijack your multi-factor authentication apps. They're able to lock the phone and hold it hostage against your ability to use it. And they also can you do things like turn on the microphone, turn on the camera, and turn your phone into basically a little spy bug in your pocket. The sort of key attackers that we see, or the key threats that we see targeting mobile, is the top one is this malware called Joker, and the sort of secondary most frequent one that we see is called FluBot. It does not matter whether you're on iOS or Android. Both platforms have vulnerabilities that these malware will exploit in order to get on your phones. And it is important to be aware of the fact that attackers will send you messages directly to your phone, making it look like you're receiving some kind of an official alert or message to upgrade or do an update, and that it is important to recognize that messages like that don't come through the SMS platform, and you should not be clicking those links in those SMS messages if you can get away with it. One other thing that's worth noting is that sort of like late this year, we reported on an attack called Crypto ROM. This was a huge number of apps that ended up in the Apple App Store in iTunes, that where basically they were posing as cryptocurrency wallet applications, and that they were basically, using these applications to steal people's cryptocurrency wallets, and in some cases relieving victims of thousands of dollars. And after we published that report, we have been pretty much nonstop, actually, for the last 2 months. We've been getting emails from people who are victims of this and begging us for help with trying to get their money back. Many people have lost thousands and thousands of dollars. And so, between apps like Joker that are getting into, and these crypto ROM apps that are getting into these official app stores, and the attackers that are using SMS, we're just anticipating that we're going to see many more of these kinds of mobile threats. So here's just a chart that sort of categorizes, we've created these sort of high-level categories because there are so many different families of mobile malware, but sort of like, the key takeaway here is that these credential stealers that will steal bank account passwords and MFA codes seem to be sort of like at the top of the barrel here, in terms of like at least an order of magnitude above every other kind of malware that we see. And we did have basically kind of a level year of like constant detection of these things, until we start to see, significant sort of like down and to the right in this chart. It means that we're, that the attackers are continuing to they're continuing to spread this stuff. And a lot of people think that just because they're downloading something out of these app stores, that the app itself must be benign, and for the most part that's true. What we've discovered is that both Google and Apple, before they allow an app to go into their official store, they go through all sorts of source code checks and make sure that there's nothing malicious in the app. And the trick that the attackers have been using is to basically have the malware be like a stub that goes into the Play Store that has some legitimate features, but it has a component within it that will pull down the malware side after you've installed the app. So the code that's on the App Store is only a piece of the malware, and they pull down the rest of it after it's on your phone. That's incredibly dangerous and very, very hard to get around. Our advice is to use a mobile malware scanning tool to watch for that kind of stuff. All right, so we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the data science team at Sophos and what they're doing with developing an AI that will help counter some of this stuff. So, we do have like I said, we have a data science team. Their job is to be thinking about the big picture of this malware. So we know, for example, that your conventional Windows malware, you are highly unlikely to ever see if you've got a sample of something, you're highly unlikely to ever see that same sample on multiple machines. It's very infrequently that malware is identical for any significant period of time enough to detect and remove it. So we've built tools that can recognize internal features and behaviors of the malware, but that even that is not enough, because there is now such a wide variety of different techniques and tools that the attackers can use, and they've developed extensive methods of obfuscating their code and doing other things to sort of prevent people from people like us from being able to detect them in a reasonable amount of time to actually offer protection. We have been developing a tool internally that will look at basically training the tool on what malware looks like, and using that to anticipate how malware will evolve and shape itself in sort of in the future. And these kinds of machine learning tools, they have been used very effectively at places like Google, Netflix, Amazon, anything where you have a recommendation engine. It's clear that the recommendation engines are effective at helping people with these problems of what you've watched these 3 TV shows, you might like this one, or you've bought these 3 things, you may be in the market for this type of product. What we are developing, what we're working on, is a recommendation engine for IT security folks, so that when they have their telemetry and inputs and alerts that they're dealing with, the data, the sort of AI will say, it looks like you're seeing this thickening and this thing and this other thing. Maybe you need to lock down this component. Maybe you need to do these other things to sort of do a better job of securing your network. We believe that that's going to be the future of helping sort of organizations of any size secure their boundaries and their internal perimeters as well. So we're developing a lot of capability in this regard, both at recognizing malware and at recognizing patterns of behavior that sort of lead to an infection, or the sort of precursors of one of these big ransomware attacks. We also anticipate, though, unfortunately, because the attackers have deep pockets and they've made a lot of money off of ransomware, that they are going to start using AI and data science themselves to enable and enhance their either the effectiveness or the convincingness of a particular type of attack. We're seeing them already using AI generated like profiles and photographs in social media, in disinformation campaigns, to sort of create spoof accounts that get past conventional like reverse image searches and things of that nature. We do know that there's also ransomware attackers that are phoning their victims and leaving them messages, and they are using voice synthesis to do some of that, to leave some of those threatening messages, so that there is no record of the voice of the actual attacker. So we believe that defenders and practitioners are going to have to keep pace with this. You're going to have to develop new tools to counter the threat of AI delivered criminality. All right, so we're getting close to the end. Neil, do you have any other questions from the group or the audience, or?
No, not at this point. No, please.
Okay, so let's jump into the recommendations for defenders. So we've talked about a lot of different types of attacks. We've talked about attacks against servers, against mobile devices, against conventional desktop machines and Windows machines and phones and IoT devices. And the one sort of, if you want to create umbrella like over all of that, like the biggest recommendation we can say is to use these like layers of protection, like an onion, that you have something at your perimeter, but also things internally that are scanning for internal attacks, so that if the perimeter gets breached, you don't have that crunchy shell with the soft gooey center. We only like that in cases of like candy. We don't want that with your layers of your security. Keeping on top of alerts, incredibly important. And I know that like this seems like super basic stuff, but let's not forget that it wasn't a few years ago that a huge retailer had installed a big network access device, and we're just in the process of testing it when a huge number of alerts came in, and it turned out that those alerts were actually valid, and that someone had deployed malware to all their point of sale systems and were stealing credit card information. Paying attention to alerts, even when something is brand new, incredibly valuable. And I think I've already mentioned, the sort of canary in a coal mine effect of things like crypto miners, showing up on machines. Like that is a gigantic red flag that demands as much attention as, if a ransomware was on your machine. But also having multi-factor authentication. I cannot actually count how many incidents in which the rapid response team was responding where it was just one account that was important enough that did not have a multi-factor authentication tool that was connected to it, that was the linchpin of the attack. So these very fundamental, having no remote access tools that are available to the public internet, and the ones that you have, sticking an MFA on it so that it, a leaked or stolen or sniffed password is not the one weak link that leads to the whole downfall of the rest of the house of cards. Considering this like whole zero trust model for remote workers and for like machines in general, even in cases where machines are internal to a network, zero trust seems to be actually a very sensible sort of like new model for configuring the security inside of an organization. And of course, basic stuff like asset control, knowing what you have, where it is, what it's supposed to be doing, and recognizing its normal activity, and having a tool set up that can acknowledge when something is out of the normal bounds of its regular behavior. Basic stuff, patching machines when Windows updates happen, making sure that you've gone through and done an APT upgrade on your Linux servers. It's very fundamental stuff, but it's with all of these threats that are coming at us from every direction, doing this basic hygiene, it takes care of the vast majority of the attacks that we see, is where something fell off the radar and was the one linchpin. And again, seminars like this, in which we talk about these threats, like educating people about the threats and educating people on what to look for in recognizing phishing and email delivered malware, is super important. And I'll say one last thing about employee education and within an organization. Every single person in an organization is on the front lines of an attack at all times, and the security team relies on these people being their eyes and ears in some cases, whether they've made a mistake and accidentally clicked enable content in that Word document that they got from someone who they thought it was supposed to be sent from, or just recognizing that a machine that they normally use is suddenly, like, the CPU is spiking and it seems to be really slow. Having a good relationship with your security team, and having the security team not be judgmental and be respectful of people, and encouraging them to come forward even when people have made a mistake, reassuring them that an accidental click of phishing link is not going to be end in punishment for you, is so critical. So be good to your people. and if you're an employee, be good to your IT security team. They're working their butts off this week trying to just protect the whole internet from this Log4j things. So yeah, be good to each other is sort of my last recommendation.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Andrew. I think with that, that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Andrew again for joining us. If you'd like a copy of the report, we encourage you to go to sophos.com. There's a link there on that last slide, sophos.com/threat report, to download a copy for yourself. Thanks again for joining us. If you're interested in membership of the Cyber Threat Alliance, please go to our website at cyberthreatalliance.org to learn more about us and click contact to reach out to our membership team. Otherwise, we appreciate your time today. Stay safe, happy holidays. And if you know a threat responder dealing with Log4j, give them a pat on the back and maybe buy them a pizza. But thanks a lot. Take care, and we'll see you next time.